Welcome to Wordplays, where you will hear stories celebrating the human spirit. Today's theme is showing up and carrying on, something I think all of us have been forced to do in the last 18 months. My name is Kate Dudding. I'm one of the producers of Wordplays, along with Joe Doolittle and Siri Allison. Before we get started with our 7 stories, I'd like to go over a little bit of housekeeping details. We'd like you to be muted, the listeners to be muted while each story is being told, in case your phone rings or your dog barks or your cat decides to do whatever. At the end of the performance, you can applaud. You can unmute and applaud, or you can deaf people applaud this way, and it's very visible on Zoom. But if you do unmute yourself to go whoa or whatever, please unmute yourself, remute yourself. Now, to tie all these stories together, I asked each teller the same question. If your story was a kind of aroma or odor, what would it be? Mary Murphy is starting us off with a personal story called Angels, No Wings, Please. And the aroma or odor for this story is frankincense and myrrh. Mary Murphy.
Thank you, Kate. When I was 10 and in 5th grade at St. Vincent's Elementary School, I got chosen to be the lead angel in our school's Christmas nativity play. I was the only angel that got to say anything. I announced the birth of Jesus to the shepherds. They'd all seen the star, of course, but they didn't know what the heck it was. And in general,
Mary, you're frozen. Oh, she can't hear me.
she was making the halos for all 7 animals.
Mary,
yes.
Your internet cut out.
Oh, it did?
Yes. So if you could go back to, they saw the star, but they didn't know what the heck it was.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed.
All right. Where was I? My mother sewed my beautiful floor-length white robe. It had wide sleeves for tucking hands into. No wings, the principal had put her foot down, but my costume was covered with as many sequins as my mother had time to sew on. Janet Beecher's mother was to make the halos for all 7 angels. She came into school one noon hour and measured everyone's head. The play was set for the Friday before Christmas. At 6:30 that night, the class assembled in our classroom to get into costumes and makeup. Excitement was running high in the girls' cloakroom, which had been turned into the girls' dressing room for the occasion. The boys kept sneaking to the cloakroom door, hoping to catch a glimpse of us girls getting dressed. Sister Frances, our homeroom teacher, had positioned herself on the inside of the door. She'd simply wait until one of the boys got so close she could hear him breathing, and then she'd push open the swinging door, bopping him on the head. The resulting ouches were hilarious. I mean, even Sister Frances seemed to be enjoying herself. The coveted role of the Blessed Virgin Mary was being played in our production by Mary Alice Tynan. She mainly got the part because she was the only one of us with an authentic baby brother whose mother could be talked into letting him play the baby Jesus. Sister Frances thought the baby would be calmer with his own sister than with anybody else. Well, Mrs. Beecher helped us all the angels into their flowing robes, and when we were dressed, she handed out halos. Now, the halos were made out of that silver tinsel stuff that you hang on Christmas trees. The fat, sparkly ribbons were sewn onto white pipe cleaners, which were bent into shape according to head size. I don't know what went wrong with the measurement, but my halo was too big. It sank onto my ears and looked more like a holy headband. Well, the angels weren't needed until later in the play. So we got to sit out front and watch until Kathy Pelletier, as the innkeeper's spacey wife, said, "There is no room for you here at my inn, but like I do have an old stable out back. You may sleep in there." When we were in second grade, Kathy Pelletier announced one day to the whole class that when she grew up, she wanted to be a horse. Well, the birth of the child was almost imminent, and so we all went backstage. And in the dim light, as the others adjusted their robes, I checked to make sure the writing on my hands hadn't smudged. You see, my speech to the shepherds was taken from St. Luke's account of the Nativity. It was important to get the words exactly as they were written. So what I did, just to be on the safe side, was have my best friend Robin Franey write the whole thing in ink across both palms. If I forgot anything, I'd simply strike a prayerful pose and read whatever part I couldn't remember. The palm reading idea had a flaw in it, however, because just before we were supposed to go on stage, Sister Frances took my glasses off. She said, "Angels don't wear glasses." Apparently, everyone in heaven is blessed with 20/20 vision. Well, after the innkeeper scene, the lights went out, the curtain closed, the cardboard sheep were pushed on, and lo, some shepherds were suddenly abiding in the fields. Tom Parfit, Randy McDonald, and my twin brother Michael were curled up asleep in front of the curtain when the stage lights blazed once more. The 6 non-speaking angels wafted out to stand in a tight little circle upstage. And then it was time for my entrance. The world had become a total blur. The stage lights blended together to form a gigantic Star of Bethlehem. I had no depth perception, so I banged into a couple of the other angels as I lurched in front of them. I was extra nervous because I could feel my halo slipping. The shepherds had begun to look like the kind of brown, lumpy glob you wouldn't want to step in. But I turned in their general direction and began. "Fear not, for behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David At this point, my halo fell off and rolled with a gentle life of its own toward the footlights. I froze. I couldn't remember my name, let alone an angelic pronouncement. I had no idea what to do, and apparently neither did anyone else. I think the shepherds went back to sleep. Well, finally, after a silence that gave us all a glimpse of what eternity might be like, my twin brother Michael came to my rescue. In his brown and gray shepherd's bathrobe, he stood up, yawned hugely as though he'd just woken up in his own bed. The rest of the cast watched him transfixed, like frightened deer caught in a headlight. Michael made a big show of seeing something down by the footlights. He walked over and picked up the halo in one hand and a cardboard sheep in the other and brought them over to where I was standing. "Did this fall off your head?" He held the halo up in 2 fingers like he thought it might be radioactive. Well, one of my sheep almost stepped on it. We could hear choking sounding coming from several places in the auditorium. The indignant shepherd continued, "I thought it was okay to eat, but now he's dead." And Sister Frances was in the wings looking at this and hissing, "Mr. Murphy!" But I finally found my voice. "Thank you, Mr. Shepherd Man." I grabbed the halo. I jammed it back on my head. Some of the tinsel fell off with a pipe cleaner and hung down my back like Davy Crockett's coonskin cap. Well, my brother went back to his surviving sheep. I did the only thing I could. I cut my hands close to my nearsighted eyes and read, "For this, let this be a sign unto you. You shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger." Boy, that didn't sound right. Anyway, the 8th grader at the piano heard something like her cue, and she started playing Gloria in Excelsis Deo, glory to God in the highest. And we all sang as the curtain opened for the final tableau. Joseph and Mary kneeling and baby Jesus lying in the manger, surrounded by hay. Well, in the car going home, I thanked my brother for helping me out on stage, and his answer was somewhat lacking in grace. He said, "Oh, I thought the play was long and boring enough already." I asked my mother if she noticed that I forgot my lines when my halo fell off. No, she said, "I thought you were just heavenly." And I think she meant it.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
Oh, you're welcome.
And nothing happened today.
No, no, my internet cut out. I never would even have thought of that back in however many long years I did that, Joe.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'd heard that story before, but I have forgotten many of the delightful details.
Oh, good. Thank you for letting me tell it.
It definitely fits the theme, showing up and carrying on, even if your halo falls off and rolls to the footlights.
Right.
Yes.
Keep on going. The Catholic school spirit.
Yeah. Thank you. Our next teller is Joe Doolittle. He was named for his father, so his formal name is Alden Doolittle, but he's known as Joe. I didn't get a chance to ask Joe the question of if your story was a kind of aroma or odor, but I thought it might be the smells you would experience if you were going down a river in the wilderness. How does that sound, Joe?
That's pretty good. It would be alder roots and buffalo grass, which is the plant life along rivers in the high prairie of our country. And it's called Little Bird. Little Bird was an Indian maiden, and she was about 12 years old in the year 1800. And she was picking berries with her friends along the upper part of the Missouri River when she was accosted by a strange, brave, and captured and kidnapped and carried away. And she looked over her shoulder and she thought, never see her mountains or her river or her prairies again. They traveled for days. She was eventually connected with a French trader named Charbonneau. They were living among the Mandan Indians on the Missouri River, and she was making do. Excitement came. White men came up the river in a big keelboat with gifts and talents and stories, and they came looking for her. They had learned that Charbonneau's wife was a Shoshone, and they needed to meet with the Shoshones up the river to trade for horses, because this Corps of Discovery led by William Clark and Meriwether Lewis was going all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back. And they needed to have a person who could speak with the Shoshone. So they hired Charbonneau, and they brought Sacagawea, Little Bird. And they brought them into their compound. And lo and behold, Sacagawea was pregnant. So in March of that winter, she delivered a baby boy. And it was a problem delivery. And the people who could help her the most were Captain Clark and his servant, York. They delivered the baby they called Papa. And in the spring, with Papa on her back, Sacagawea rode in the canoes and began to guide the Corps of Discovery. And she soon demonstrated her value. At one point, one of the pirogues capsized. And in that boat was Sacagawea and also the portable secretary that Clark and Lewis used for writing all their notes and reports. And Sacagawea, with the baby still on her back in the water, picked up the secretary and got it to shore and saved the records of the entire expedition. They got close to the land of the Shoshone. And they were sending out parties to try to connect with them because they really needed this connection to trade for horses. And Lewis was out on scout with several men, and they came upon a band of the Shoshone. Now, they didn't bring Sacagawea with them, but they sent for her. And in about 3 hours' time, she came up to the party. And it was not unlike her. Instead of the calm, cool traveler, she jumped up and down, began to speak in her language, and ran across the field and jumped into the arms of the chief of the Shoshone. It was her brother. Talk about coincidence. Talk about good connections. Now, it wasn't only that connection that produced important elements for the Corps of Discovery during their trip. But Sacagawea became an ever-present leader, guide, interpreter of nature and mountains, and literally how to go. Such was the respect for this young lady that when the Corps of Discovery reached the Pacific Ocean, she was placed in the bow of the first canoe, and she was the first person to paddle into that mighty ocean. There were many other episodes of things that she did that were valuable, that showed her strong will, that showed her ability to grow and learn and share. Such is the record which was kept in that secretary about her contributions to this historic trip, that in 2000, the US government commissioned a Sacagawea dollar, and it's 90% silver. That's most of any silver coin ever produced by the mint. And on one side, it has the eagle and the signs of our nation. And on the other side, it has a picture of a young woman, the baby on her back, making history. Such is the story of Little Bird.
Yay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Oh, I never knew that what her name translated to in English, and hearing more about all that she contributed to that historic journey, it was fascinating. Thank you, Joe. Our next teller is Eileen Egan Mack. And when I asked her the question about the aroma or odor that her story captures, or was fresh spring air. Eileen, please share your original story called Melody.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Joe, for reminding us about that great hero in Sacagawea. And Mary, oh my goodness, thank you for helping us laugh. It's so great to be able to laugh. So this story actually comes from the basics of it come from a storyteller from India. So when I heard her tell this story, I was like so taken with it. I thought, oh, I want to take that story and see what I can do to bring it to life in my own way. And Kate's, when she was talking about the Albany Symphony Orchestra and the debut, or second debut, live debut of this composer's music, really ties in with my story, because my story starts with a composer who is sitting at the piano, having just played through a piece she wrote, which she thought was the most beautiful piece, but she couldn't get anybody to take it. There was no lyricist that was willing to write words to it. There was no orchestra that wanted to orchestrate it. It was not going anywhere. It was not going to be heard. And so she kind of had to face that for now. And she collected the sheets of paper with all the music on it and put it over on a table in the corner. And just went out of the room, shutting the door, going downstairs to have a cup of tea. Well, days passed and weeks passed, and that music sat there gathering dust, dust onto dust, And that piece of music, melody, she did not want to go to dust on that corner table. She wanted to have a life. She wanted to develop. She wanted to see what would happen as people sang her music or played her music, because up until somebody takes it, it's just simply black dots and black lines and white spaces on a piece of paper. And she wanted to be more than that. She wanted to be heard. Well, our composer had just finished practicing and writing down some new notes, not using the MIDI synthesizer to hear her works. And on this beautiful spring day, she decided to go have a cup of tea and sit out on the stoop with her tea. But before she left the room, she thought she'd open the window a little bit to let some of that spring air in. She went out and closed the door. Well, that spring air made its way into the room and ruffled the pages over on the table in the corner. And Melody felt the stirring of the spring air. And somehow she found a power within her to lift herself up off of those pages. And she flew around the room and spied the open window, and out she went across the city. Down below, the music of the city rang up with car horns beeping and trucks honking and the squealing of brakes and the noisy motors making their engine sounds. And she soared around and explored all the sights and sounds and came to a place where it was more open and green and there were trees growing up. And down below, as she swooped in, she could hear the sound of water coming up in a beautiful water fountain. And children's laughter rang in her ears. And she could hear over there the sounds of people cheering a baseball game on. It was a beautiful, glorious spring day in the air, in the blue sky, in the green, and in the sounds of the earth that were like music to her. But as she came away from that open green space, an aggressive jackhammer jolted her being, and she decided to find her way out of the city. And she made her way out of the city soundscape to where there were houses in small clusters. And out beyond that to where there were just a sprinkling of houses, or then a single house and a space, a green space, and then another single house, until eventually she was far away and there were hardly any houses at all, but there were trees. And as the evening approached, she settled down in a tree to rest. And that night, the sounds of the spring evening lulled her to sleep. The peepers, the birds. And when she awoke in the morning, it was the sounds of the wood thrush and the veery and the robins that awakened her. So she stretched her little self and flew off into the sky one more time. And as she flew, it was trees and hills and hardly any houses until up ahead she could see a gray, huge building walled in. And it was pulling at her, not in a lovely way, which you're drawn to music or drawn to a beautiful sight or drawn to the face of a baby, but it was pulling her and she really couldn't resist. Until she got closer, she realized there was a darkness to this energy, a power that she didn't understand, but she had to follow. And as she came down over that building, she came into a room. And as she looked down at the front of the room, she could see there was a pianist. And it was as if he was playing through wet concrete, hard to get his fingers to move, and his body was stiff, and nothing seemed to flow, and the beauty wasn't there, and there was an energy coming from the people watching, or the people present. I can't even say present. The people that were there. Some of them stared ahead with vacant, unseeing eyes. Some of them, their chins just rested on their chest as they tried to escape into a kind of sleep. Some fidgeted in their chair, barely able to sit there. They were all dressed alike in orange jumpsuits. And this dark energy that pervaded the room even sifted out to the people on the sides who seemed to be just stationed around the room, and they were in blue uniforms. Well, Melody knew what she had to do. She poured herself down and slipped into that piano, and her music came up through the strings and the keys and into the pianist's fingers, and the fingers began to float, and the pianist was coming to that music from a centered place. And the music was sad, oh, so beautifully sad. And those eyes that stared vacantly ahead, and those chins that were resting on their chest, began to feel this terrible but beautiful access to the emotion of what it is like to be sad and to acknowledge it. When the pianist looked up, he could see tears coming down cheeks. He realized tears were coming down his cheeks, but he played on. And the music went from being so exquisitely sad and giving them access and allowing them to feel sad. It began to feel lighter and happier and more joyous, and eventually it came on to being a wonderful, joyous piece, glorious in its feeling of happiness and hope and joy. And when the pianist's hands lifted off for the last time at the last chord, he looked up, and the men in the room could hardly bring themselves to applaud. They didn't really need to applaud. He knew, the pianist knew, and Melody knew. Those walls that were around them, those guards that were there, those uniforms that locked them into being a certain type of being, they had escaped this prison somehow from the inside out through the music. And as they left that auditorium, that big room that day, while their bodies were still imprisoned, they realized they'd been given a gift to themselves, to access to their internal emotions through the music. And they looked forward, finally, to the next time they would come back and be with their teacher, their pianist. And that's what happens sometimes when music shows up.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. For those of you who don't know, Eileen has a beautiful singing voice. And I think her love of music just flowed through that story, that very imaginative story of taking us through a soundscape, a journey through of sounds, and then the melody getting where it needed to go. Thank you very much, Eileen.
Thank you.
Our last teller in the first half is Sandy Shuman, who is going to tell us a personal story called My Father Was a Songwriter. So, another story about music, perhaps. But interestingly enough, when I asked him the question, he said, an aroma or odor, that would be worms. We'll just have to see how worms fit with your father, a storyteller, Sandy.
If it's not obvious, you're just not paying attention. Well, I ran into an old friend, from my days in Boy Scouts, and we were heading in opposite directions. We're trying to do a quick catch up, where have you been for the past 60 years? And he says to me, "Your father was an electrician, wasn't he?" And I didn't really have time to say much about my father. So I just said, yeah, that's how he made a living. It was one of those situations where, a person gets reduced to what they did to make a living. And I felt the injustice of that, but I had to go and he had to go. But now I've got some time, so I'll tell you, one of my earliest memories as a child is sitting in the back of the family car on a long trip out to Long Island to Tony Messina's house. My father and Tony Messina collaborated in the art of songwriting. Tony wrote the music, my father wrote the words, and I suppose that at an earlier time, they lived in the same neighborhood, they'd get together and work on their songs, but Tony had moved out into the suburbs. And so that long drive out there, and when we finally got to his house, it was really quite a delight for me being a city boy, because out there, it was, to me, this was the country, the big backyard, no fences, one backyard connected to another. It was just a great wild place, and they had a dog and there were lots of kids. And as I'm running around playing, every now and then I would catch a glimpse of the house off in the distance, and I'd think, they're in there writing songs. How do they write songs? And I wondered about this, but I wasn't allowed in there. I'm having a good time playing with the kids, the dog. Well, years go by. When I was in high school, my youngest older sister, I have three of them, the youngest one was in college and she was majoring in music. She's an oboist to this day. And as a music major, she had to learn how to play the piano. So it was my assignment, along with my father, to look through the Want Ad Digest every week and look for used pianos for sale. And then my father and I would go and look at them. And you could buy an upright piano for $50, $100, $150. People really didn't want them, apparently. They were big, they were chest high or more. I'm looking at one off to the side. There's probably chin high on me. And massive ebony, mahogany. We saw a lot of them. And we'd play them. Neither I or my father could play the piano, but we could, finger the keys and listen to the quality of the sound. We found one that sounded good, good condition, every note played, $100. We went home, got my mother. She saw the piano, and that's when we started looking for a studio upright, the Campbell's condensed soup version of the upright piano, only waist high, not up to your chin, not as thick. And we found one polished walnut, beautiful piece of work, $300. The piano movers installed it in our downstairs family room. And my sister learned how to play the piano. And now, of course, we had a piano, and so Tony could come to our house, and he did. And he and my father worked on their songs downstairs. And I figured, wow, this is my chance, finally. And so I heard them working on a song downstairs. I'm in the upstairs hallway. We had an enclosed staircase. I open the door, I go downstairs, I go through the doorway into the family room. And as soon as I arrive, Tony stops playing the piano. He spins around on the piano bench. He says, Sandy, how's high school? What's your favorite subject? Which teacher do you hate the least? And I realized that I was never going to find out how they write songs. They were not going to do it while I was in the room. So I went back upstairs and I lingered in the hallway up there, and I fully aware of the ethical issues, I put my ear to the door to try to overhear them writing songs, but I couldn't make it out. It was too muffled. So I grabbed the doorknob, one of those old glass rosette kind of doorknobs. And I was very familiar with this door. I knew how squeaky it was. So I turned that knob ever so slowly, so it didn't make a sound. And I pulled the door open ever so slowly so the hinges didn't creak. And I grabbed the inside handle and I held the tension against the spring so the latch didn't spring out and make a noise. And I got myself onto the first step of the stairway and I closed the door very carefully and rotated the knob so the latch went back into place, didn't make a sound. And I listened. And I heard Tony say, okay, Sam, let's run this song through from the beginning. And Tony plays this delightful introduction. He could really make the piano, the heavy as it was, float in the air. And then my father came in on the lyrics and they sing this song through, and then they have a little laugh, you know, and yeah, it's pretty good. But we should work on it some more. Let's put it aside and let's look at that song we worked on last time. And my father says, yeah, you know, that musical phrase, you know, I can imagine he's pointing to the sheet music where it's written out. Tony, it said that sounds just like, and he names some popular song that I don't remember, or I probably never even heard of. You know, it sounds just like, Tony says, yeah, you know, you're right. I'm going to have to change that. Let's leave that for now. Now about this part, and he talks about a part where the lyrics don't really fit with the music that he wrote. And they have this arduous task of fitting the words and the music and marrying them together. Sam, you know, can you just change the wording? No, Tony, add another note, make it a dotted eighth note over there, and then an eighth note over here, and that'll work. And they try it out. Yeah, that's right, it'll work. And they sing that song through from beginning to end. No, that's just not working. And they go through it phrase by phrase, measure by measure, adjusting a note here, adjusting a word there. My father, you know, what's another word for, okay, let's try this. It was work. It was tedious. It was almost painful. And then finally they'd finish a song. Yes, this is it. And they'd send it into a music publisher. And then they'd get a rejection letter. And then they'd try again and write another song and another song. I have the folder with all the rejection letters. They never had a single song published, though they wrote more than 75 songs together. Now, you're wondering, what about these songs? So I'll sing one for you. Never published, like all of the others. And I'll confess to you that while I think this is one of the best songs they wrote, my wife doesn't like it. It's in the genre of breakup songs, I would say this one is angry, painfully so, and vengeful even. So here we go. Remember when you wanted one more chance? I said yes to save the romance. It's gonna hurt you when I desert you, but you have had your chance. I used to worship the ground you walked on. I loved each topic you talked on. Now we're through. The little worm is gonna turn on you. You said that people should be like brothers. The way you criticized others made me blue. The little worm is gonna turn on you. Once we went to a swell affair. You seem to know everybody there, but I felt so humble. Didn't grumble, you didn't even care enough to give me a tumble. You used to take all the easy pickings, but now you're getting the dickens. Here's your cue. The little worm is gonna turn on you. I used to cater to every wish, dear. I said that you were my dish, dear. Now that's taboo. The little worm is gonna turn on you. I just took the initiative to find someone who's appreciative, but I'm gonna haunt you, tease and taunt you. I'd send you to the devil, but I doubt if he'd want you. I've been so weary and so embarrassed, humiliated and harassed. Yes, it's true. The little worm is gonna turn on you. As far as we go, this is the finish. So let your ego diminish. Here's your cue. The little worm ain't gonna squirm. He's getting firm. He's gonna terminate this romance with you. The worm is gonna turn on you. Copyright 1952. Music by Anthony Messina. Words by Samuel Shuman. My father was a songwriter.
Oh, Sandy. I was liking it, but I'm going, gee, your father had at least one of them had some bad relationships.
Oh, it's all in the imagination. But did you pick up on the worm?
Yeah, Sandy, it was, yeah. Every time you said it, it was kind of, yeah, I noticed. In your usual style, you always make a very definitive connection to the theme, or in this case, to the question of the day. So, thank you very much, Sandy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a perfect compliment to my story. Unplanned.
Yes.
Amazing.
Okay. Yes. So it's time for intermission. I have a few slides to share with you. The suggested donation per person for each of our performances is $12. You can donate online, and I believe Claire is putting this information in the chat, or you could make a check out to Story Circle and mail it to me. And I think most of you are already on our email list because you have the Zoom link. But in case you're not, you can sign up on our to get further announcements about our events. Now, this performance will be rebroadcast on public access TV here in Schenectady, Open Stage Media's Arts and Education channel. Now, on our website, storycircle@proctors.org, at the upper right corner of every page is the section about next shows. And you will see there are several mentioned that, and I'll be mentioning them. And then at the very bottom, it says additional storytelling events. Well, let me show you just a few of those. The local Interfaith Story Circle is going to have its 16th Under the Tent of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar meeting. 16 years ago, this started because Abraham, those three people are very important in the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish religion. That's something that they all have in common. And so that's coming up on Thursday, November 18th. The day after, Joe Doolittle is hosting an open mic for storytelling, music, and spoken word stories around the steeple. And then at the end of the month, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, at the Cafe Lena's Storytelling Night, the featured tellers on November 23rd are going to be the fabulous Eshu Bumpus and Modico. And you can get in-person tickets or you can attend by live streaming. So I just wanted to point out these additional events that are coming up and that even Yvonne and the Pacific Northwest could attend, all of them. And now it's time for a brief intermission. Welcome back. Our next teller is Jerry Burns, and she's going to share with us a recently created personal story titled, Let's Talk Turkey. When I asked her the question of the day, she said, oh, it's the smells you would encounter while walking on a shady country lane. Jerry, please tell us your story.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm going to try to see if I can get you all on gallery view. Yeah, so I can sort of see you all. All right. Well, hi. It's great to see you. Great to be here. You know, when the pandemic hit, I felt as if I was personally smashed by Miley Cyrus's wrecking ball. I mean, I was a wreck, a ball of anxiety on my couch. Sound familiar to any of you? Yeah, right? It was like really intense. The world changed. I went from being a person who used, natural essential oils only types of cleaners to bleach. Give me bleach, all the bleach in the world, the most toxic substance. I gotta slather it everywhere because that's what they told us to do. Remember that, right? So I slathered it on, the doorknobs and on the light switches. I slathered it on countertops, but I did even more. I slathered it on the walls, on the ceilings, and the cat just escaped just by accident. I just had to get rid of it in every place. But it wasn't just inside my house, but the things that were coming into the house. Remember groceries? You wipe down everything that comes into the house because that's what they told you to do. But the thing is we only had so many wipes, Like we had a few canisters, but only a few, and you couldn't get more because the shelves were empty. And so we had to carefully, ration them. So we would put a whole bunch of things on the front porch, let the sun and the air kill off every last remnant of coronavirus particle. And then on the rest of those things, we would use those precious wipes and clean them off. But it wasn't just the groceries, but the person who went to the store too. I mean, like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Oh no, I couldn't walk into a store. I shuddered in fear and I trembled. My husband Barry kindly took on the grocery duty, but when he got home, he wasn't coming into the house. No, until he took off all those clothes, because that's what they told us to do, right? Well, he took them off and then we carried those things into the laundry room and he had to go change. Like I wanted to wipe him down with the wipes, but we didn't have enough, right? So he had to deal with his own cleanliness, his body, his choice. I just wanted him to take a shower, a lot of them. Anyway, so this was me. I was everything. Like our bubble was this big. I mean, it was just my son, Zach, who graduated college into the pandemic, so he was home, and Barry, my husband, and that was it. All of the people we saw on little screens in boxes, just like we're doing now. That was it. Nobody could come into the house. Everything just scared me. I mean, this is like, some people call this approach to life COVID cautiousness, but I would just call it what it is. COVID anxiety, and I was the archetypal case of COVID anxiety. And I had to do something to chill it down, right? So I discovered the wonders of melatonin at night, the wonders of CBD oil by day. And I did that time-honored thing that you do to help reduce anxiety. I exercised. I had, I always exercised. I mean, that was just a thing I've always done. I have a very, consistent workout approach. But during the pandemic, I started strength training. And then I shifted my hill walking on the treadmill to walking outside so I could be near trees and I could smell something other than bleach. And I would walk out there and, and people said it was safe to go for walks, right? But still in all, I carried my mask because it was possible that as I was walking along the street, some other human outside my bubble would be walking on the same street. And what if they breathed and I walked into it? I mean, people weren't talking about that whole aerosol thing, the coronavirus like sailing on the water droplets coming out of your mouth. But I was thinking of it. It's not what they told me to do, but I would put on my mask to walk outside just in case. So I was that person. I was a very intense, frightened, anxious person. And so you can imagine the surprise of my husband and son one summer day when I said, Barry, Zach, my friend Ira from high school, he's coming over. Well, they looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. Well, I sort of had anyway, but they just didn't know what I was talking about. Ira is coming. I'm like, yes. And he was. See, Ira, a friend, he lives in suburban, urban Philadelphia. And he was having to make a trip upstate New York, and on his way back he needed a place to stop so he didn't have to go into a rest area. He didn't have to go into a restaurant. So I said, he could stop at our house and we can give him food. And so on the day that it was happening, I went rushing out to the window all day. Like I kept checking to see if he was here. Like kids check for Santa out their window. At least mine did, always like stared out the window. Well, I just kept doing it. And finally I saw it. He pulled his hybrid sleigh into my driveway. I raced down the stairs and I stood at the front door, my arms outstretched. Well, not to hug him. It's too early in the story for a transformation. It was to say, I don't you dare come in this house. You stay away. You can't enter. You can go there to the yard. Well, it didn't sound very welcoming, but the thing was is that he didn't want to come into my house. He didn't want to inhale our aerosols just as much as we didn't want him to exhale his. So we had planned to go out to the patio, and that's where we sat, right? He sat at the table. I went into the house. I put on my rubber gloves, and I set up a plate of food. I brought the food out, and I set it out at the far end of the table. I was a good, just about 6 feet away from him. And I pushed it across the table like I was playing air hockey. And then I sat down, not at the other end of the table, but at the other end of the driveway. I mean, I wasn't going, of the other end of the patio. I wasn't going to get anywhere near him. And so we had a conversation, projecting our voices from a good distance. It worked. It was comfortable. All was good until the moment when Ira had to use the bathroom. This was not something anybody had pre-planned or thought of, but now he didn't want to come into the bathroom. We talked about it. He didn't want to have our aerosols, and we didn't want him in the bathroom, all of that. And then I had this idea. We have groves of trees in our yard, and Marnie might remember them. Barry and I got married under a particular grove of trees in our yard. And so we sent Ira to the wedding grove. But we didn't check to see if he left us a belated wedding gift or anything, not since. No. But then Ira and I, it's like, okay, it's time for a walk. Enough of this sitting and screaming across a patio. So we took a walk. Now, I'd been taking so many walks, right? Because to help calm myself. So one of the walks I thought of that would be just right for Ira, a suburban urban dad, but also to keep us safe, a country lane. Now, this country lane was perfect because we could walk 6, 8, 10, 12, 19 feet apart. One of us could be slap in the middle of the street, and cars would not be a danger because it was a nice country lane with lots of trees, nice shade. It was just right. The other reason I wanted to do that walk was because Ira is this suburban guy, and he loves nature, and he and his family often would go up to the Poconos in Pennsylvania to see what they could see. But they hadn't been to the Poconos, they hadn't been anywhere but their own backyard, lockdown, right? Except for this trip that he had to do. So I thought, this is like a little nature walk. I'll take him there. And I was right, because the first thing we came to was the first pond, the pond with all the lily pads. It's home to the neighborhood heron. Now, the heron was home as we passed by, but didn't want to get too close to us. And so the heron rose up in all its angular glory and flew across the pond to the other side, a safe social distance for a heron from us. And Ira gaped at that. "Oh, wow," he said. I knew I picked the right walk. And then we kept walking down that tree-shaded lane when we came upon a driveway to a house that was in the distance, but at the end of the driveway was a little child's red wagon with a cooler in it. And on top of the cooler, there was a sign that said, "Fresh eggs, $4 a dozen." Ira looked at that. "Oh, wow, you can get your eggs right on your walk." I was like, yeah, we can. And then we walked a few more feet to the next driveway where there was another cooler with another sign that said, "Fresh eggs, $3. Capitalist competition on the road. Oh, wow. He couldn't believe it. He was so excited. There was this jaunt in his step, almost bouncing as we kept walking down this road. And then we got to the place that I was looking most forward to. It was a little yellow house down at the end of the road with a great big yard with hills and a spreading tree in it. Now, there's a fence in front of it that separates the house from the road. Not exactly white picket, but if you like the image of a white picket fence, paint it in your imaginations. So there was this fence, and from the gate was a slated pathway up to the porch of the house. Now, this was a porch that was ground level. The door was off to one side, but it had a roof over it. So it was a nice shady place. And that was one place some of the farm animals that lived around that house would go to get out of the sun. And there were chickens. There were ducks. there were goats, and some of the goats were sitting in the yard, but in the middle of that yard, standing near the tree, like mayor of that farmyard village, was the biggest, fattest tom turkey either one of us had ever seen. "Oh, wow," Iris said. He raced up to the fence, he pulled out his phone, he started snapping pictures. Well, the turkey was an excellent subject because he turned his head, he waggled his waddle, and he gazed right at the camera. "Oh, wow," Iris said, and he built up a whole portfolio of photographs that would make his Instagram full for 3 months. And then he bounced away from that. He said, Jerry, this is awesome. This is awesome. What a great walk. Now, Jerry, what do you think those animals are for?" And I was like, well, the chickens, well, we saw the use of chickens just a little while ago, right? Like, chances are the chickens are for eggs, right? And he says, yeah, and I guess the ducks are too. I'm like, probably, yeah, I mean, it's likely. He said, all right. Well, what about the goats? And I was like, well, some people use goat milk, but it's also possible that goats are used for something else. Now, I don't know if any of you do this, but our neighbors across the street, Tom and Peter, they do this every November. They rent a herd of goats to come over to their backyard and live there for 2 weeks to eat down the meadow that grew in their yard. And there's several groups that rent these goats in the Hudson Valley. And Ira said, or maybe they're just the Yellow House people's, old school lawnmower. I was like, maybe. It could be. Yeah, let's say that's what they're for. And then Ira's big smile, his happy, gaping, excited face grew concrete, like he was in a courtroom doing his lawyerly work. And he said, what about the turkey? Now, I don't know about any of you, but I've spent time working on a farm. I've spent time taking care of farm animals. I've also gone through the experience of transforming farm animals from animal to dinner. I said, maybe the turkey is for Thanksgiving. Ira's a vegetarian and he was not happy about that. So he changed the subject and we stopped talking about it. But that didn't mean I stopped thinking about it. Oh, no. When I took my walks subsequently, sometimes I would go back down that road. I would check at the little yellow house. Now, that was all fine, and the turkey was good, always standing proud, waddle waggling in the breeze. But as I approached a holiday that we are approaching right now, I was getting a little concerned. And as I sat at the table with our tiny little bubble, it was just Barry, Zach, and me sitting there at the table eating our turkey, I started thinking about my neighbor, the turkey. Next day, Black Friday, the day that everybody in 2020 was thinking about the time that they were trampled on a Black Friday line, but just thinking about it in memory because they weren't doing it, I was walking down that road. I went straight down that road, got to the yellow house, and I looked. I saw the chickens, I saw the ducks, I saw the goats, but I didn't see the turkey. I mean, I knew this could happen, but I felt my heart sink into my stomach. I didn't see him anywhere. And so I started composing the horrible text in my head. I turned away from the yard, and then out of the corner of my eye, under that tree, what I took to be a shadow of the branches under the tree was actually the turkey. Ira's turkey was there, standing under the tree, standing tall and proud, waddle still waggling. While I snapped a picture, I texted it to Ira. Ira's turkey survived Thanksgiving. I was so happy. I walked on air. And then 2 weeks later, we had, maybe you'll remember this, that unbelievable nor'easter, that freak nor'easter that dumped nearly 2 feet of snow right on everyone, absolutely by surprise. And I said, oh no, Irish turkey. So after everybody dug out, I went straight down that road. The Yellow House people dug out their house too. And what they had done was they had dug a pathway from the gate on the fence all the way to the little porch. And so all the snow came out of that pathway and piled higher and higher and higher in the yard. No animal could get in the yard now. All of the animals were huddled on that porch. And in the middle of them all was the biggest tom turkey I'd ever seen. Irish turkey survived the nor'easter. Yes! But there was still one more holiday to go. Right? We all know. And so on Boxing Day, I dragged Barry and Zach with me for moral support as we walked down the road. We got to the little yellow house, and the first thing I saw was Irish turkey. It was there. Irish turkey showed up. He was there. He was there. I could see him, and I said, Irish turkey survived Christmas dinner. Oh, wow. And then, in that moment, I realized that this may be Ira's turkey, but this turkey was also my turkey. I'd connected to that turkey. That turkey had survived all of the horrors that early winter in America deal out to turkeys. And you've got to admit the odds are stacked badly against turkeys, right? This turkey had survived dinners and holidays and a nor'easter. And I realized that if my turkey, Ira's turkey, our turkey, if that turkey could survive, could find a way to cope with all of that, then I could find a way to cope with all of this. And so from that day onward, whenever that wrecking ball of the pandemic knocked me flat on the couch or the floor, I've talked turkey to myself. I've said, Jerry, you remember that turkey, Ira's turkey, your turkey, that turkey survived all of those things. So can you. And then I peel myself up off the floor or the couch or wherever I am. I stand tall and proud like a turkey in a barnyard. And I realize that if my turkey can show up, I can carry on. And while this, pandemic COVID cautiousness hasn't completely gone away, I wish I could say it was a magic cure, but I couldn't stop all that anxiety cold turkey. But thanks to the help of family and that turkey, I'm still carrying on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. It's so wonderful you shared that story. The topic and the story fit so well together, and that we all now have a lasting memory of your personal pandemic mascot.
Yes, exactly.
Yellow House.
Yeah, that's our mascot. My mascot.
Yes.
Love that turkey.
Go turkey. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Now, for a complete change of pace from that, We have as our next teller, Marnie Gillard. And Marnie, you'll have to unmute yourself. Marnie's story is from Irish lore, but it's an original tale by Ella Young from her collection Celtic Wonder Tales, which was published in 1910. And it's called The Earth Shapers. When I asked Marnie about the question of the day, the aroma or odor, she said both a heavenly and an earthly scent. Marnie.
Great. Well, long, long ago, the Tua de Danann, the people of the Celtic goddess Dana, lived in a land of perfect harmony. They knew no trouble, they knew no sorrow. There were all parts of their world, Tir na Nog, Tir na Mo, Moy Mel, Tir Tatan. They were a happy group. But one day, the goddess Bridget came to be singing near where some of the gods were. I'm going to speak her song, but listening to that song had a big effect on them all. Now comes the hour foretold, bringing a wondrous sight. Is it a star, newborn in the night? Is it a wave, flinging foam of delight? Is it a flame from the world of the gods with love running before it? A quenchless delight? Then let that wave break, let that star rise, let the flame leap. It is ours, if our hearts are wise, to take and keep. Now there was a deep silence, and all the gods were looking at Bridget when she stopped singing. And then the very young Angus, the son of the Dagda, started whining, Bridget, I didn't like those words. I felt them pulling me down, down, down into some dark place. I felt hot breath all over my face. Oh, that song was calling me. But whatever it was calling me to, I don't want to go to. And Bridget, smiling from ear to ear, said, Angus, you're right. That was the earth singing. Really? Because I didn't think you were singing it. The earth was singing it? Yes, the earth was singing. You heard well. The earth, said the Dagda, their leader. How could that pit of chaos even make a song? The earth is so dark and miserable and full of monstrous life. How could the earth even create such a song? Oh, my beautiful beings who've known no sorrow. I stopped to listen to the earth singing, and it is longing for silence and song, and most of all for beauty and for peace. Really? Said the Dagda. Who would think that unhappy place would even want peace? It's such a mess. Yes, it's struggling, but it dreams of the white stillness before dawn. It yearns to see the last bright star that vanishes as the sun is rising. It yearns for singing and color and light and beauty. And Angus began to whine again. Oh, Bridget, I wish I had never heard that song. I can't shake it off me. Then don't shake it off, she said. My young friend, don't you want to hear the rumbling thunder of the abyss? It is yearning for what you have, beauty and order and music and bliss. And then Midder, one of the gods with flaming red hair, stepped up and he shook those red tresses like a golden fleece. And he said, I long to look into the darkness with you, Bridget. I want to linger and listen for that dark and thunderous song that the earth is singing to us. Good, she said, good. I'm going to take my mantle. Now, Bridget's mantle could surround the earth because it could grow and grow and grow. It was a magical mantle. And she wanted to put it around the earth so it would help them find this beauty, and all the gods would listen for this cry of help. And Midder said, I'll dive down into the chaos first, and I'll throw fire onto all the monstrous life below. I'll take the spear of victory, one of our great treasures, and I'll clear a space for your mantle to fall. Well, just hearing that, the Dagda changed his tune. All right, all right. Now that you've mentioned the spear of victory, we could take the sword of light, and we could take the cauldron of plenty, and best of all, we could take the stone of destiny. That would change the earth. We'll bring all four of our greatest treasures, and together, the shining Danann lords, they just began to fall like cool rain into that blackness that was writhing and contorting. Monstrous forms were swarming like angry bees and groping as if they were going to devour each other. It was a horrible thing. Now, these gods who knew no sorrow were frightened and they pulled back. But that is what gave Midder the chance to dive down and to tread on the chaos. And he was stomping on it like grapes that might finally make fine wine. And he held up that spear of victory, and tongues of flame came out of it. And he whirled it around, and all the darkness first turned sort of a murky red, but slowly became a kind of bright red, blood red. And then finally, a glowing rose red. Bridget, throw down your mantle, bring it down. I've cleared the space for us. Send your cloak to bless this troubled earth. Now, Bridget's cloak, as I said, could have covered the whole earth. But that young Angus, now full of confidence, jumped down and stomped right on the mantle, and it stopped growing. But where he stepped, a great white mist began to spread all over, and all the Danann lords were bumping into each other. It was like children playing in the darkness and not being able to quite see, and they were laughing and bumping into each other in the foggy light. And the Dagda brought the cauldron of plenty, and he set it down, and he said, Cauldron, you have always given us what we most need. We need you to give the earth what it needs. And young Angus went right over and started digging his hands into the cauldron and pulling out all this beautiful greenness. And suddenly there were purples and reds and whites and grays and blacks and browns. And the earth began to have such a beauty to it, with tall trees. And little Angus was using his fingers to make streams. And then soon, all of a sudden, there was this laughter, and water began to fill the streams and the deep lakes. And it was crystal clear water. And it became crystal because Menanin McClear, also one of the gods, the god who governed the sea, he took the great sword of plenty and of wonder, and he began to wave that around, and it was a bright, clear light, and a crystal clear wave came from all that darkness that brought a sound of peace to the place. And Bridget lifted her mantle, and the gods saw that they had shaped an island. Emerald hills and valleys and these tall trees with great trunks dotted the landscape. And the Dagda said, "Now I know you were right, Bridget. We must stay. We must stay and finish, or at least help to finish, the earth become what it was meant to be, a place of poetry and song and music." Can you hear the bubbling? Yes, yes, that's the earth's laughter. We're getting there. And Angus blurted out, "Maybe we can bring all the magic fish from our lands and the silver trees that sparkle." But Bridget stepped up and said, "You know, Angus, I think the earth is going to teach us what it needs, just as the cauldron of plenty gave it a start. And I think it will have its own kind of creatures, its own kind of fish, its own kind of magical beauty." Yes, yes, I think we will help the earth, but it will teach us, the gods, how to make it happy. And Bridget knew she needed to leave and go tell all the gods in the other parts of their heaven. And Angus said, before you go, could we do two things? One, could you take some of the fringe from your mantle and tie a knot of remembrance so we won't forget what we have pledged to do is to care for the earth and to listen to what the earth needs and its people and its creatures, whoever comes to this place. And can we give this place a name? I think we should call it the Island of Delight." And Bridget laughed and said, "That's a good idea, but something tells me we should call it Ireland." And that's my story. Thanks to Ella Young in 1910, who was writing all the Irish stories down, like so many of the other artists were trying to bring all of their joy and beauty back to their land. And they have it now. They certainly have it now. If you get to go to Ireland, it's a pretty cool place. Thanks.
Thank you, Marnie. Well, you took us way back in time.
I have
Jerry
to say,
took
I
us
did
back
think
to
of,
last fall.
I did think of Jerry walking all those paths and bringing wonder through her walks. Yeah.
So they're very different, but they're closely tied. Thanks a
Mhm.
lot, Marnie. Now, Linda McKinney has our last story for us today. It's a personal story called Lillian. And the aroma or odor for her what is lilies, Lilies and Lillian. Tell us more, Linda.
Thank you. This is a story about two Lillians, past and present. Past. When I was old enough to leave our block in the small village where I grew up, I would often walk to visit my grandparents, Arthur and Lillian. Arthur was the talker, but Lillian was the behind the scenes kind of person, always present, never complaining. She didn't drive. She never took long walks. You see, my grandfather was a prisoner in his bed, tormented by very painful rheumatoid arthritis, and Lillian was his only caretaker. So she was sort of a prisoner herself. When I would arrive, she was often sitting at the kitchen table, smoking a Camel cigarette and staring out the window, perhaps thinking about a life that might have been a little different. Her cousin and his wife lived in the brick house across the street, and Lillian liked to monitor their comings and goings, and maybe with a twinge of longing for similar freedom. Lillian was a really good listener. I could go on and on about how my parents were tormenting me and about the boy that I liked and a myriad of other topics that a teenager considers very important. And Lillian was always there for me with her calm presence. One day, Lillian told me that, well, her maiden name was Lyons, and she told me that we were distant relatives of Queen Elizabeth. Well, I was young enough at that point to actually believe her and not realize that her laughter was because she was joking. Lillian loved a good laugh. Years later, I told that same story to two of my grandsons, and I listened to them expound for the longest time about who would have to die before one of them could ascend to the throne. And as I was enjoying a chuckle, I was imagining that Lillian was chuckling along with me in heaven. When my grandfather died, Lillian lived by herself until I married and my husband and I moved in with her. He was in the Navy and we couldn't afford an apartment, so she welcomed us into her home, and we had a bedroom upstairs. I took over the cooking responsibilities because I was eager to learn how to cook. And one of the dishes that I was trying to master was homemade pasta sauce. Even today, when it simmers on the stove, I think about how Lillian would add extra spices every time I left the room. But she never told me what they were, so it never tastes the same. When my husband's tour of duty was over, we moved into our own apartment, but it was still only a few blocks away, so I continued my visits to Lillian. But when we moved out of that village, visits became more sporadic. And when Lillian passed away, I felt a great loss in my life. However, I am comforted by the fact that Lillian comes to visit me in my dreams. Words that I could use to describe Lillian: stable, supportive, balanced, untippable, fun, are words I could use to describe the current Lillian in my life: a kayak. The present. My children chipped in and gave me money to buy a kayak. Now, not because I'm an avid kayaker, but because I aspire to be. And because I was a novice, I researched kayaks that were stable and not easy to tip, and I purchased a lime green one, which I christened Lillian. All right, here's the way my brain works. Lillian, love lilies, are green, Lillian. kind of that way. And we enjoy a lot of freedom on the lakes and creeks in my area. And I talk and she listens. Now, before you conjure up this image of this graceful kayaker, the only time I look like I might know what I'm doing is when I'm paddling, but I still have not learned how to do that without getting wet. Getting in and out of the kayak is my nemesis. I sort of just plop myself in and I struggle to get out. I find it very difficult to stand up from that very low sitting position. And so I carry this very sturdy little stick with me that I use as a lever. One sunny afternoon, I loaded Lillian into the truck. And my plan was to launch somewhere in Fish Creek, which meanders snake-like through eastern Saratoga County. There are places that you can pay to launch, but I was looking for a more out of the way, less crowded place. And okay, yes, I'm frugal. My daughter-in-law had told me about a spot that she used, and so I went there first. Well, it was a very, very steep decline down into that creek. It was concrete. I knew that getting in would be impossible and getting out would be disastrous. So I had to pass on that one. I continued to drive along the creek, stopping at various places which I thought might work, but when I looked, I knew they wouldn't work for me. I was getting a little discouraged. And then I remembered that my daughter had told me about another place. And so I decided to drive there. And as I was going up an incline, a gradual incline through a village, and I passed a thunderous waterfall on my left. A short bit up the road, I noticed a bridge across the creek. And so I turned and went across the bridge. And on the other side, there was a grassy area that was designated for public use. And so I parked the truck and I got out to investigate. The land sloped down very gently to the creek, but there was still a little bit of a drop off. I wasn't sure if this was going to work. You see, when I managed to get into the kayak, it's partly on land and partly in the water, so it's kind of stable. And I just wasn't sure. But then I noticed that there was this area, kind of worn area near the bridge, closer to the bridge, that I felt other people had used. And at the bottom of it, there was dirt, which looked like it was kind of a mini beach. So maybe this would work for me. I was going to give it a try. I unloaded Lillian from the truck. I put my car fob, my key fob, and my phone in my dry bag. I clipped my paddles together, being careful not to pinch my finger as I did the very first time. I put on my water shoes and I put on my life jacket. I was ready to go. I grabbed onto Lillian and I slowly lowered her down that incline, and I was kind of squatting and like crab-like, and maybe sort of my bottom on the ground, and lowered her until she was about halfway in the water, the swift moving water, and halfway on the land. Holding on very tight so as not to lose her, I stepped onto that area, which I thought was like a beach, and I sunk right up to my shoulders in muck. I did manage to get into that kayak, but I cannot tell you how I did that. It's erased from my memory. But I did manage to keep the paddle. And I also managed to deposit a fair amount of silt into the kayak with me. I pushed away and started paddling against the current, which wasn't that strong. And I was able to make my way forward until I got to the part of the creek that was calmer. It was quite lovely. Birds were singing, the sun was shining. I was having a very nice time. But the thought of me going back and having to get back out again kept intruding on my tranquility. I thought about paddling all the way to Saratoga Lake, but I knew that wasn't going to work. So I turned around and eventually went back to where I had launched, to that area. And I started looking along that little bank area to see, was there a place for me to get out that would work? There was a big flat rock. So I paddled over there and I thought maybe I could like climb up onto that rock. And so I kind of leaned forward and I put my arm on the rock. But then I realized that once I exited the kayak, she was going to float away and go right down over that waterfall. I noticed over to the side, there were these two pointy rocks that had a space in between. So I thought if I could paddle fast enough and jam the kayak in between those two pointy rocks, they would hold the kayak stable enough for me to then climb out onto the bank. After several tries, not successful, I abandoned that idea. Then I saw a truck drive across the bridge and I struggled to get my emergency whistle out of my life vest so that I could blow it and maybe they could help me, but I wasn't fast enough. So we paddled over to where I had launched and I held on to a clump of grass on the shore and I just sat there thinking. Well, I held on a little too long and the grass sort of came out of the dirt. And so I grabbed on in another spot and then I patted that one back in like, kind of like a divot on a golf course. But in that moment, I had an epiphany. I knew how I was going to get out and save Lillian right along with me. So the first thing I did was I took my dry bag and I threw it up on the hill. And when it started rolling back down again, I commanded it to stop, and it did. Then I took the paddle and I put that on shore. And then I took it right back again because I realized that every time I let go of the grass, I was going to float away and I would need the paddle, which of course did happen. Then I took off my life jacket. Now you might be thinking that this was a foolhardy thing to do. However, I was more worried about losing Lillian than I was about drowning. So I took one of the straps of the life jacket and I tied it as tightly and securely as I could on that little crisscross stretchy thing that holds your water bottle. And then I put my other arm through the life jacket. And then I started climbing out of the kayak, up the grassy slope, grabbing on, praying that the grass held, up, pulling myself up, pulling, until I was finally up onto the grass. And then I rolled over on my backside and I started slowly going backward up the hill and dragging 40-pound Lillian with me. It was a scoot and pull and scoot and pull and scoot and pull. Halfway up, the paddle swung out of the kayak and I had to go all the way back down to the bottom and grab the paddle and I put it up on shore. And then I started the scooting and the pulling again until I finally got all the way up to the top of the hill where it was level and grassy. And I just laid back with Lillian by my side and I looked up at the sky and then I just started laughing hysterically with relief. And I like to think that Lillian in heaven was laughing along with me.
Oh.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you. I think I want you on my team if ever I'm in a hazardous situation, that I think you can cope with almost anything.
Well, when I did go home and tell my husband that story, he threatened to take the kayak away.
Yes, yes. Well, but you survived.
Yeah.
You showed up and you carried on and you carried Lillian up with you. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That comes to the end of our program of showing up and carrying on. One more round of applause for our storytellers. They're wonderful stories, all different kinds, heroic, funny, touching. Thank you so much, tellers. And thank you, listeners, for coming and joining us and listening to the stories. We appreciate you. Thank you to Claire Nolan, our technical guru. And Thanksgiving is coming, so thank goodness for that.